So following that, we're going to review the film VOX LUX, which is currently in cinemas around the city.
Not quite just yet.
Okay.
Not quite. We expect it to come out on the 3rd of May, and also it's another one which will be available on Curzon On Demand. So it's directed by Brady Corbett, who people would probably recognise from a couple of Michael Haneke and Lars von Trier films. Another actor turned director, which we spoke about in the last show. So he's got one feature film before, The Childhood of a Leader, and this is his new one, which is based upon nothing. It seems to be an original story, and it follows basically a young pop star. So we open with a tragic event, let's say. I don't want to necessarily spoil precisely what it is, but off the back of this young woman, Celeste, is kind of catapulted to national fame. So she finds herself in the world of music production and becoming a sort of a child pop star at quite a young age. It then basically focuses on the latter section of her life, and by latter I mean just that it is later. She's still in her early 30s at this point, at which point she's played by Natalie Portman. And basically it's just kind of looking at the effect of the opening tragedy on her and how it's affected her life, and basically following her interactions with her family. So right from the start, she's very close with her sister, and she is a character throughout as well. Her manager that she gets off the back of starting that career, which is played by Jude Law. And then there's also her daughter in the second part of the film. So it's split into these two acts. It calls Genesis and Regenesis. And that basically is the framing device for that particular story. And in my view, it works quite well. It doesn't quite come together for me. There's a lot to unpack in this film, and there's a lot of things that I think you could read into it. And for me, it didn't necessarily fall upon one, but just to kind of get the discussion going on that, I suppose I'd be interested in what Annie thought of that and what you took from the film. Because obviously there's a lot going on, but what kind of stood out to you?
It's funny that you should ask, because I have a list here. So I made a few notes while I was watching the film. Let's start from the very beginning. Hate the credits at the beginning, it says. Also, consequently, hate the credits in the end. So it does this weird thing where it runs the credits backwards, or they go like from...
Yeah, they go from bottom to top.
Bottom to top. Why? And also, it has the credits in the beginning, which is then it already starts, and then the whole... Actually, my second point being act structure is shit everywhere. So it does this artificial kind of... It already tells us, like, oh, this is going to be something different. You know, we're not going to do things like everyone else does. And fine, act structure, all right. But when you call it Genesis or Regenesis, like, you lose me at that point. Sorry. In everywhere, there's not just this film, but when you do something like that, it feels a bit stupid.
So you'd recommend people structure their films that way?
Yeah, just let it flow, naturally. Anyway, third point, I don't like the songs. So I know in the beginning when she's in her early parts of her career, of course the songs are not great. They're like heavily auto-tuned, and they're intentionally crappy. But then also I was like, okay, it's going to get better than this. No, it doesn't. So in the end, even when there's this massive concert scenes where the film ends, the songs are still really bad. Then on more points that I have, unless you want to say something in between, the kid actor doubling is a weird choice. So this again is a bit of a spoiler, but the same actor who plays her as the young girl who's getting into the music industry is also playing then Celeste's daughter. And okay, a nice gimmick, but the character is exactly the same. There's not enough change, I feel, for it to be reasonable. It's just the same character over and over again.
I would argue, so a lot of the points you've made there, I totally agree with.
I have more, so...
I don't doubt, as we said, there's a lot to unpack here. I think to pick up on a couple that you mentioned there, the credits thing I think is an interesting one, right? Because basically it has a pretty cold open effectively into this event, and then as we're looking at the aftermath of it, which I actually find it quite frustrating, because the actual filmmaking, the shot making of the aftermath of that event, I actually thought it was really good.
Yeah.
And the score, so not the written music, not the songs. The score I also think is very good, and that, like, it was working together really well there. But then you have the part of the credits play over that segment, and it seems like it's trying to set it up for, as you said, we're going to do this a little bit differently, we're building up to something where we want your full attention, so we're getting this out of the way now. It doesn't really do that, so that it kind of promises something, then doesn't pay off on it. The second, but the only thing I would disagree, the idea of the young actor playing both young Celeste and Celeste's daughter, it kind of worked for me in what I think it was trying to get across. I don't think it worked within the film as a whole, because in the opening act, Celeste is this very kind of wide-eyed, enthusiastic, really quite put together young woman who is trying to seize this opportunity that has come her way. You then fast forward a full 16 years, and the film makes a big deal about 9/11, September 11th being the point at which we then break and cut. So it's kind of the loss of innocence of the character in addition to the nation. And it fast forwards 16 years. So I think the fact that the daughter was quite similar to the young Celeste, I think it worked in being able to directly contrast the two.
All right, yeah.
So in that respect, I think it worked. I think what doesn't work is it's not really getting across what I think it wants its message to be. It's another one of these films where I feel like it wants to say so many things. It wants to talk about America and its response to tragedy. It wants to talk about what tragedy comes about from. It wants to talk about the impact of fame on young people. It wants to talk about how people consume it and what they do with consuming artwork and all these things. And I just don't feel it really landed the bullseye on any of them.
Not at all. Not to me either, no. One of my points actually is that I like the first part of the film. I like the part where there's the strategic beginning, which was done, I think, very tastefully and in a way that's not done before. So there's a character who starts all this horribleness, and he's not portrayed like that kind of character is portrayed in everything else I've seen so far. So that was an interesting premise. So that I was interested at that point. But then the moment we go into Natalie Portman's character, it just turns into crap. Like it's my other point is mega cringe. So there's the dialogue that I found, the first dialogue between Natalie Portman and the daughter is absolutely horrible. So it tries to say all these things, like you said, it tries to tap into all these issues, but then the way it's portrayed is just ridiculously stereotypical. So there's all this glitter and gloss, and it's saying people, once you go into fame young, you start using drugs, and then you have to drink wine all the time, and you have to be drunk, and you lose your personality, and you become this like spoiled brat. But that also loses the weight of the character as well. I think some people are saying this is Natalie Portman's best acting job, and I think it's definitely the worst one. I think she's doing a horrible job, but I'm not sure if it's the script or if it's the direction or what it is, but I'm kind of leaning on towards the script being like ridiculously stereotypical.
I would agree with the problem being the script. I actually think she probably does a reasonably good job with what she has, but I think part of the issue for me is the structure of the film. So there's all sorts of, as I've discussed. I mean, and I only just watched this film last night before we spoke about it, and I kind of wish I'd watched it a lot sooner, right? Because there is quite a lot to parse here. But there are a lot of strands to it. But I actually think the time jump between this Act 1 and Act 2 doesn't serve the film that well, because it's wanting to make comments about, as we've said, potentially the impact of fame, potentially the response of societies to tragedy. And I suppose, just so we can stop dancing around it, we don't need to go into details about the opening scene, but let's just say it takes place before 2001, because that's when we have the time jump, and then prior to that, it's a pretty obvious vehicle for a Columbine allegory, basically. And obviously Celeste is caught up in this, and it has an impact upon her and then the path that she then takes. So it's trying to say something about how people, and maybe American society, at a wider level, respond to tragedy. But the thing is, because you've got this massive time jump, it's basically focusing more on the end point. We don't really get a lot about why is it that people are responding in a certain way. What is it that drives people to go down certain routes to cope with tragedy or cope with early fame? It kind of skips to the end.
Yeah.
And to me, for me, it kind of loses a bit of impact as a result. It doesn't mean it has no interesting things to say. I think it has a lot of interesting things to say. I just don't think it is saying them in a very interesting manner.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my biggest issue with it is it would be amazing if it would be able to tap onto these things on like society's level, but it is so much a character film. So it's all about this character who is this and this and that. And when the character is not that strong, I just lose it. It's just lost on me. I don't get anything out of it. And then it's also, I think it's built on very loose premises. So for example, there is the end scene that I mentioned, that's a massive concert.
Yeah.
Just goes on way too long for what it is. So first of all, the songs are shit. Secondly, if it's supposed to be this like a big stage show, the stage is just a flat stage. It's like if you do something like this, bring in like a Beyonce's Pyramid from like Coachella 2018 kind of shit, not just a flat stage with nothing on it. It seems very, very vague and very fake to me. And it's maybe because also this subject, if it was just a character study of someone who's gone into fame at a very young age, is done so much better before. So what I automatically thought of when I watched this film was Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue. If you're familiar with that, it's remade, or sort of like it was an inspiration then for Black Swan, which is also another Natalie Portman film. But it discusses this kind of how public perception is affecting your personal self and the way you see yourself and the person you become because you're in public eye from such a young age. And it does that so well. It's difficult to top that. And maybe I was too stuck in that idea to think, oh yeah, it's just trying to tell us what fame can do to you. But that's what the film is to me. If it was more about that, or how do we as Americans deal with grief and deal with violence and deal with loss, that would have been way more interesting, but it just doesn't get there.
Well, that's the thing. I think if it had focused more on that, I think it could have been a stronger film. There was one line that actually kind of stood out to me, and it's when they're talking about the response to a terrorist attack later in the film. So it doesn't happen in the setting of the film, but it's kind of a key part of the plot and a lot of the character interactions in that second act. And basically, the line is uttered, if everyone stopped paying attention to them, meaning the terrorists and people who perpetrate tragedy, they'd cease to exist. And then the Celeste character makes the observation that, well, perhaps that would mean that nobody would pay attention to her anyway, but so be it. So it clearly wants to try and draw these parallels, but it doesn't really fully commit to them. And it's got this very Von Trier, now admittedly it has a voiceover, which is done by Willem Dafoe, and obviously, like, you know, Willem Dafoe is a bit of a Lars von Trier staple, and I felt like it kind of gave it a bit of a, you know, melancholia type vibe, but the material you're then dealing with kind of sat at odds with that tone. It clearly has aspirations to making kind of greater philosophical or greater commentary based points, but it doesn't really commit to them. It's like you've just said there, if it had a bit more of that, I think it could have been a more compelling film, but it's just it doesn't. It wants to just, you know, tickle around the edges of all of these different themes, when I think it really needed to fully commit to one. And I think if it had done that, it would also have a slightly better ending, because to me the ending was a bit of a damp squib. I don't really know what you're meant to get from it, and sure, there's huge layers of artifice around this concert it finishes on, and again, maybe that's part of the point, because it feels so apart from the rest of the film, just as it is apart from the rest of, you know, our as normal people, day-to-day existence, right? I'm not getting up and singing songs in front of 30,000 people, nor would you want me to. So that's maybe part of the point, but it's just, it kind of loses sharpness with a loss of focus. And whilst the chaos is meant to be a part of her life and it's meant to communicate something that's going on with the character, it really means that it's very hard to take something from the film clearly. There's lots going on, but it's just too amorphous and diverse to really actually fully communicate it.
Yeah. And in the end, one of the songs she sings is like, I'm a private girl in a public world. It's like, yeah, we got that already from the first 90 minutes of the film.
Yeah, it doubles down on things that you don't really think it should, and it doesn't pick up on other things.